The night Johnny Carson collapsed during a live interview with Lucille Ball, the studio fell completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. 18 million Americans watching from their living rooms saw the king of late night fall forward onto his desk motionless, while the queen of comedy sat frozen just 3 feet away. But what happened in the next 7 minutes was never shown on television. The cameras kept rolling, but NBC made sure the world would never see what Lucille Ball did next. They buried the footage. They made the audience sign legal documents promising to never speak about it. And for over 30 years, the truth about that night stayed hidden until now. July 19, 1974. The Tonight Show studios in Burbank, California. It was supposed to be just another Friday night broadcast. Johnny Carson, at 48 years old, was at the absolute peak of his career. 15 million viewers tuned in every single night to watch him. He was America's best friend, the man who tucked the nation into bed with a smile. But behind that famous grin, Johnny Carson was falling apart, and only a handful of people knew how close he was to the edge. Lucille Ball wasn't even supposed to be on the show that night. The scheduled guest had canceled at the last minute. When the producers called Lucy in a panic, she said yes immediately. But here's what no one knew at the time. Lucy had her own reasons for wanting to see Johnny that night. She had heard rumors from mutual friends, whispers that Johnny wasn't okay, that he was drinking too much, working too hard, pushing himself towards something terrible. Lucy recognized the signs because she had been there herself years ago during the darkest chapter of her own life. She came to that studio not just as a guest, but as a friend who was deeply worried. What unfolded over the next 2 hours would change both of their lives forever. Johnny's collapse was just the beginning. What Lucy told him while he lay on that studio floor, the secret she had never shared with another living soul, would become the reason Johnny Carson survived that night. And the promise they made to each other in those 7 hidden minutes would bind them together until the day Lucy died. So, what really happened when the cameras cut away? What did Lucille Ball whisper to Johnny Carson that made him weep openly? And why did 2 of the most famous people in America agree to pretend this night never happened? Stay with me because this story is about to break your heart and put it back together again. And before we go deeper, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far the story travels. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what Johnny Carson was hiding from the world. In 1974, Johnny Carson wasn't just famous. He was an institution. The Tonight Show wasn't just a talk show. It was a nightly ritual for millions of American families. Johnny's face was more familiar than most people's relatives. His voice was the last thing America heard before falling asleep. He made it all look so effortless, the perfect timing, the easy charm, the way he could make any guest feel comfortable while keeping the audience entertained. But behind the curtain, Johnny Carson was living a nightmare. His second marriage to Joan Copeland was collapsing. They fought constantly. Johnny had moved out of their bedroom months ago. Divorce papers were being drawn up in secret. The stress was unbearable. But Johnny couldn't let anyone see it. The king of late night didn't have marital problems. That wasn't part of the image. And then there was the drinking. Johnny had always enjoyed a cocktail or 2 after the show, but in 1974, a cocktail or 2 had become a bottle or more every single night. He couldn't sleep without it. He couldn't quiet the voice in his head that kept telling him he was a fraud, that one day everyone would figure out he wasn't as charming or talented as they thought, that the whole empire he had built would come crashing down. His doctor had warned him 3 months earlier. His blood pressure was dangerously high. His heart was showing signs of strain. The doctor's exact words were chilling. "Johnny, if you don't slow down, your body's going to shut itself down, and it might not give you a second chance." Johnny ignored him. He couldn't slow down. The show needed him. NBC needed him. America needed him. Or at least that's what he told himself. The truth was simpler and sadder. Johnny Carson didn't know who he was without the show, without the applause, without the nightly validation of millions of viewers. If he stopped performing, he would have to face the emptiness inside, and that terrified him more than any heart attack. Meanwhile, across town, Lucille Ball was getting ready for what she thought would be a simple television appearance. At 63 years old, Lucy was already a living legend. I Love Lucy had changed television forever. She had built a production empire. She had survived the very public collapse of her marriage to Dessessy Arnaz. She had reinvented herself more times than anyone could count. But Lucy carried her own secret pain, a chapter from her past that she had never shared with anyone, not her children, not her current husband, not a single interviewer in all her decades in the spotlight. That night, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, Lucy felt compelled to see Johnny. When his producers called about filling in for the canceled guest, something in her gut told her to say yes. Something told her Johnny needed her. She had no idea how right she was. As Lucy's car pulled up to the NBC studios that evening, she had a strange feeling she couldn't shake, a heaviness in her chest, a sense that something important was about to happen. She was about to walk into the most significant night of her entire career, and it had nothing to do with comedy. The Tonight Show theme music filled the studio at exactly 11:30 p.m. The audience erupted in applause as Johnny Carson walked out from behind the famous rainbow curtain. He waved, flashed that trademark smile, and took his place behind the desk. To the millions watching at home, he looked exactly like he always did, confident, relaxed, in complete control. But backstage, Lucille Ball saw something different on the monitor. She leaned closer to the screen, studying Johnny's face. His skin was pale, almost gray. There were dark circles under his eyes that the makeup couldn't quite hide. His smile was there, but it looked painted on, mechanical. Lucy had known this man for over 20 years. She knew when Johnny Carson was performing off-script, and right now everything about him screamed that something was terribly wrong. Please welcome the one and only Lucille Ball. Lucy took a breath, put on her own performance smile, and walked onto stage. The audience went wild. They always did for Lucy. She waved, blew kisses, played the part of America's favorite redhead perfectly. But her eyes never left Johnny. As she approached him for the customary greeting, she made a decision. She hugged him longer than usual, and she whispered something in his ear. "I'm here, Johnny. Whatever you need tonight, I'm here." She felt his body tense. For just a moment, his composure cracked. When they separated, his eyes were wet. He blinked it away quickly, gestured for her to sit, and the interview began. The first 20 minutes went smoothly enough. Lucy told stories about the early days of television, about the chaos of filming I Love Lucy with a live audience, about the time she accidentally set her costume on fire during a sketch and kept performing anyway. The audience laughed. Johnny laughed. Everything seemed normal, but Lucy was watching him carefully. She noticed how he kept touching his left arm, rubbing it absently while she talked. She noticed how his responses came a half-second too slow, how he was sweating more than the studio lights could explain. Twice he lost his train of thought mid-quest. Both times Lucy jumped in with a joke, covering for him so smoothly that no one in the audience noticed. She was carrying him, and she was getting scared. About 35 minutes into the interview, Lucy was telling a story about a disastrous pie fight scene. Johnny laughed genuinely for the first time that night. A real laugh, not performance. Lucy felt a moment of relief, and then his face changed. His hand went to his chest. His expression tightened. The color drained from his cheeks even further. "Johnny." Lucy kept her voice light, but her heart was pounding. "You okay, darling?" "Fine," he said, but his voice was strained. "Just a little heartburn. It's been making me eat at that terrible deli again." The audience chuckled. Ed McMahon laughed from the sidelines. But Lucy didn't believe a word of it. She had seen that look before. That gray pal, that hand pressed against the chest. She had seen it on her own father's face 30 years ago, the night before he died. She made a decision. She would finish this story, then find a way to get Johnny off the stage, call for a commercial break, something, anything. But she didn't get the chance. 5 minutes later, Lucy was wrapping up an anecdote about her grandchildren. Johnny leaned forward to ask a follow-up question, and that's when everything fell apart. His eyes went unfocused. His body swayed. His left hand gripped the edge of the desk, so hard his knuckles turned white. "Johnny," he tried to speak, his mouth open, but no words came out. And then in front of 18 million viewers, Johnny Carson collapsed forward onto his desk. His microphone made a terrible screeching sound as he fell, and the studio went completely, utterly silent. But what Lucille Ball did in the next 7 minutes would remain hidden from the public for over 3 decades, and would reveal a secret about Lucy herself that no one ever expected. For 3 eternal seconds, nobody moved. The audience sat frozen in their seats, unsure if this was part of some elaborate comedy bit. They waited for Johnny to pop back up, flash that famous grin, deliver a punchline, but Johnny didn't move. He lay slumped over his desk, completely motionless. His coffee cup had toppled over, spilling across his notes. His microphone was still screeching with feedback. And then Lucille Ball did something that shocked everyone in that studio. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She didn't wait for someone else to take charge. The woman who had spent 40 years making people laugh stood up from her chair, walked around that desk, and took complete command of the most terrifying moment in Tonight Show history. Someone call a doctor right now. Her voice cut through the silence like a knife. This wasn't the warm, playful Lucy that America knew. This was the voice of a woman who had run a television empire, a woman who didn't fall apart when everything around her was crumbling. She knelt beside Johnny's chair, loosened his tie, checked his breathing. His chest was rising and falling, but barely. Shallow, ragged breaths. His face had gone from gray to almost white. "Johnny, can you hear me? Johnny." His eyes fluttered but didn't open. Lucy turned to face the audience. 300 people staring at her in horror. "Everyone stay calm," she said. Her voice was steady, commanding, completely in control. "We need space and quiet. Help is coming. Please stay in your seats." And they obeyed. There was something in Lucy's voice that made people listen. Something that said she had this. Something that said, "Trust me." Ed McMahon rushed over, his face white with shock. "Lucy, what do we do?" "Get the medical team now and tell the control room to cut the feed." Seconds later, the technical difficulties card appeared on screens across America. 18 million viewers suddenly found themselves staring at a static image, wondering what had happened to Johnny Carson. But inside the studio, the cameras kept rolling. The tape machines kept recording. This footage was supposed to be destroyed later that night. But one copy survived, and what it captured would remain one of television's most closely guarded secrets. Lucy stayed at Johnny's side. She held his hand, and she started talking to him in a low, steady voice. "Johnny, listen to me. You're going to be okay. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." His eyes fluttered again. This time they opened halfway, unfocused, confused, but conscious. "Lucy," his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, honey. Don't try to move. Help is coming." Johnny's hand tightened around hers. And then, in a voice so broken it didn't sound like him at all, he said something that made Lucy's heart shatter. "I can't do this anymore, Lucy. I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" "That I'm okay." Tears started streaming down his face. "I'm not okay. Nothing is okay. My marriage is falling apart. I drink myself to sleep every night. I haven't felt happy in years. And I'm so tired, Lucy. I'm so tired of smiling when I want to scream." The studio audience couldn't hear this. They were too far away. But the microphone clipped to Johnny's tie was still active. The surviving footage captured every word. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She didn't let go of his hand. "I know, Johnny. I know exactly how you feel." "How could you know?" His voice cracked. "Everyone thinks you have it all together. America's favorite comedian, the woman who's always laughing." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, and then she made a decision to tell Johnny something she had never told another living soul. "Johnny, I'm going to share something with you. Something I've never said out loud. Because I need you to understand that you're not alone and that survival is possible." She took a deep breath. "In 1960, after Dessessy and I divorced, I thought my life was over. Not my career, my actual life. One night, I was alone in my house. The kids were with Dessessy. I was sitting alone in the dark, holding a bottle of pills, thinking thoughts no one should ever have to think. I was closer to the edge than I'd ever been." Johnny's eyes widened. Even in his weakened state, the shock was visible on his face. "What stopped you?" he whispered. "My daughter called." Lucy was only 9 years old. She just wanted to say good night, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Mommy, promise me you'll be there when I wake up." And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just living for myself. Someone needed me to be there tomorrow. Lucy squeezed Johnny's hand tighter. Johnny, who needs you tomorrow? He was silent for a long moment. Tears continued to stream down his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. My boys, Corey and Chris. They need their dad. Then that's why you fight. That's why you stay. Not for the ratings, not for NBC, not for any of it. You stay for them because they need you to be there when they wake up. The medical team had arrived now. They were checking Johnny's vitals. His blood pressure was dangerously high. His heart rate was erratic. They needed to get him to a hospital immediately. But Johnny wouldn't let go of Lucy's hand. Don't leave me, he said. I'm not going anywhere, Lucy promised. Not tonight. Not ever. She rode with him to the ambulance doors, held his hand until the very last moment. As the paramedics prepared to close the doors, Johnny looked up at her one final time. Lucy, thank you for telling me about the pills, for being honest when I needed it most. Lucy leaned down and kissed his forehead. You're going to survive this, Johnny. And when you're ready, we're going to talk. Really talk. No cameras, no audience. Just two friends who understand what the darkness feels like. The ambulance doors closed and Lucille Ball stood alone in the NBC parking lot, tears streaming down her face, knowing that what had just happened would change both of their lives forever. But she had no idea what was about to happen inside that studio, or the lengths NBC would go to make sure the world never learned the truth about this night. Inside the Tonight Show studio, chaos had erupted. NBC executives had arrived within 30 minutes of Johnny's collapse. They gathered the 300 audience members together and made an announcement that would ensure this night stayed buried for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed tonight was a private medical matter. Mr. Carson is receiving excellent care and is expected to make a full recovery. However, we are asking each of you to sign a confidentiality agreement before leaving the studio tonight. This is to protect Mr. Carson's privacy during a difficult time. Some people refused. They were quietly pulled aside and spoken to by network lawyers. By the end of the night, every single person who had been in that studio had signed the agreement. The footage was ordered to be destroyed. The official story given to the press was simple. Johnny Carson had experienced exhaustion from overwork. He would be taking a brief medical leave, nothing more. But one copy of that night's recording was not destroyed. A young production assistant, who understood the historical significance of what had happened, made a secret copy before the master tapes were erased. That copy would stay hidden for over 3 decades. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Johnny Carson lay in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling. The doctors had given him the full picture. His blood pressure had been at stroke levels. His heart showed signs of significant strain. If he had kept going at his current pace, he would have been dead within weeks, maybe days. Your body did you a favor, one doctor told him. It shut itself down before something catastrophic happened. Consider this your final warning, Mr. Carson. There won't be another one. Johnny spent 3 days in that hospital. He had visitors. Ed McMahon came. His producers came. NBC executives came, mostly worried about when he would be back on the air. But the visitor who mattered most came on the second day. Lucille Ball walked into his hospital room, carrying flowers and wearing no makeup, no glamorous outfit, just Lucy in simple clothes, looking like any other woman visiting a sick friend. She sat down beside his bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Johnny broke the silence. You told me something on that studio floor, something I don't think you've ever told anyone. Lucy nodded slowly. I haven't. Not even my children know about that night with the pills. Why did you tell me? Lucy looked at him with those famous blue eyes. Eyes that had made millions of people laugh. Eyes that had hidden so much pain for so many years. Because you needed to know you weren't alone, Johnny. I could see you were standing at the same edge I stood at in 1960. And sometimes the only thing that saves us is knowing that someone else survived it, too. Johnny, reach for her hand. I don't know how to thank you. You want to thank me? Then get better. Be there for your boys and call me every single week. So I know you're okay. Every week. Every Sunday. I mean it, Johnny. You call me and we talk. No performances, no jokes. Just real conversation between two people who understand each other. Johnny nodded. Every Sunday. Every kept that promise for the next 15 years, until the day Lucille Ball died in 1989. Johnny Carson called her every single Sunday without fail, without exception, through his divorce, through his next marriage, through career highs and personal lows. Lucy was always there on the other end of the line. Before she left the hospital that day, they made one more promise to each other. What happened that night stays between us, Lucy said. The public doesn't need to know. They need us to be strong. They need us to be Lucy and Johnny. If we tell them the truth, we take something away from them. And what about the audience? They saw everything. NBC is handling it. The footage is being destroyed. No one will ever know. Johnny shook his head. 300 people keeping a secret forever. That's impossible. But he was wrong. For over 30 years, not a single person from that audience spoke publicly about what they witnessed. Some were bound by legal agreements, but most stayed silent because they understood they had seen something sacred, something private, something that wasn't theirs to share. The world would have to wait 3 decades to learn what really happened the night Carson collapsed. But the full truth wouldn't emerge until after both legends were gone. April 26, 1989. The phone call came early in the morning. Johnny Carson was at his home in Malibu when the news broke. Lucille Ball had died of an acute aortic aneurysm. She was 77 years old. The woman who had made America laugh for half a century was gone. Johnny Carson led that night's Tonight Show broadcast, the first time he had ever done so for celebrity death. His staff said he'd locked himself in his office for 3 hours. When he finally emerged, his eyes were red. His voice was hoarse. "She saved my life," he told the producer, Fred Dordova. 15 years ago, she saved my life, and I never got to tell the world what she did for me. Fred was quiet for a moment. "You could tell them now, Johnny." Johnny didn't respond, but something had shifted in his eyes. Lucy's memorial service was held at St. Monica Catholic Church in Santa Monica. Hollywood royalty filled the pews. Bob Hope, Carol Burnett, Gary Morton, Lucy's second husband, her children, Lucy and Desi Jr., and Johnny Carson sitting in the third row looking more broken than anyone had ever seen him. The service was beautiful. Stories were shared. Tears were shed. And then Johnny stood up to speak. He hadn't been scheduled to give a eulogy. He had asked the family that morning. They said yes immediately. They knew how much Lucy had meant to him, even if they didn't know why. Johnny walked to the podium. His hands were trembling. He gripped the sides of the lectern and looked out at the crowd of mourners. "Most of you knew Lucy as the greatest comedian who ever lived." He began. "I knew her as the woman who saved my life, and I think it's time I told you how." The church fell silent. Johnny told him about the collapse, about how Lucy took charge when everyone else froze, about how she sat with him on that studio floor and talked him back from the edge. He didn't share everything. He kept Lucy's confession about the pills private, honoring the promise he had made to her 15 years earlier. But he shared enough. "I was ready to give up that night," Johnny said, his voice breaking. "Not just on my career, on everything. And Lucy wouldn't let me. She reminded me that people needed me. Not the audience, not NBC, my sons, the people who would miss me if I disappeared." Tears were streaming down his face now. He made no attempt to hide them. "I called her every Sunday for 15 years after that night. She never missed a single call. She never let me drift away. She was my friend, my conscience, and my guardian angel." He looked at Lucy's casket, at the flowers surrounding it, at the photograph of her smiling face. "I love you, Lucy. Thank you for not letting me go." Johnny stepped away from the podium and returned to his seat. The church remained silent for a long moment. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. The man who never showed emotion had just revealed the deepest truth of his life. After the funeral, reporters tried to get Johnny to elaborate. He refused every interview. He never spoke publicly about that night again. But his words at Lucy's funeral had already begun to spread, and the impact would be greater than anyone could have imagined. In the weeks following Lucy's funeral, something remarkable happened. Johnny's eulogy was reprinted in newspapers across the country. The story of how Lucille Ball had saved Johnny Carson during a secret crisis touched millions of people. Letters poured into NBC by the thousands. But they weren't asking for autographs or tickets to the show. They were sharing stories, personal stories, stories of their own dark moments, stories of the friends and family members who had saved them, stories of the phone calls they had been meaning to make but kept putting off. Mental health organizations reported a significant increase in calls to helplines in the weeks after Johnny's eulogy was published. People were reaching out, asking for help, admitting they were struggling. Because if Johnny Carson could admit he wasn't okay, maybe it was safe for them to admit it, too. Lucy had been gone for weeks, but she was still saving lives. When Johnny retired from The Tonight Show in May 1992, his final episode was watched by 50 million people. In his emotional farewell, he mentioned Lucy one last time. "I have been blessed with many wonderful friendships in this business," he said. "But the friend who mattered most, the friend who was there when I needed her most, was Lucille Ball. I think about her every single day, and I always will." Johnny Carson died on January 23rd, 2005. He was 79 years old, in his final years. Those close to him said he never fully recovered from losing Lucy. She had been his anchor, his Sunday voice, the one person who truly understood what it meant to smile for the world while carrying unbearable pain in private. So, what can we take from this story? What lesson did Lucy and Johnny leave for all of us? Perhaps it's this: we never truly know what someone else is carrying. The brightest smile might be hiding the deepest pain. The person who seems to have it all together might be one moment away from falling apart. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give another human being isn't advice or solutions. It's simply presence. It's saying, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I understand." Lucy saved Johnny's life not because she had all the answers. She saved him because she was honest about her own struggles, because she showed him that survival was possible, because she made a promise to check in every week and actually kept it for 15 years. That's the power of showing up for someone. That's the power of being real. If this story moved you, I hope you'll do something with that feeling. Reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in a while. Check on a friend who always seems fine. Make the call you've been putting off, because you never know who's struggling behind their smile. You never know whose life you might change simply by showing up. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories about the moments when legends showed us their real selves. Share this video with someone who has been there for you. Let them know they matter. And remember what Lucy taught Johnny on that studio floor. You're not alone. Someone needs you tomorrow, and that's reason enough to stay. Don't wait to tell the people in your life that they matter. Do it now. While you still can, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and tell me who in your life has been your Lucy, who showed up for you when you needed it most. I'll see you in the next.